Thank you so much, Rahul, for doing this and taking out the time. Everyone, thank you for taking out the time. I know a founder's life is not easy, and taking out time is quite difficult. So thank you for coming and joining. Rahul is a third-time founder. He's also an ex-Axel founder. We were investors in his last company. Since then he started to build AI Dash. AI Dash is essentially leveraging satellite imagery to essentially build a cleaner, greener, and safer planet. And the last few years, we've personally been quite excited about their journey. They're doing broadly like upwards of $10 million ARR, have grown close to 4-5x in the last year, have raised over $40 million from lots of investors, and is one of the fastest growing companies in the AI/ML space. Right. So what we'll do is we'll spend the next 40 minutes asking him a few questions around acquiring the first set of customers, building the first set of products, expanding the products across different use cases, and also sort of figuring out how do you sell an enterprise sort of ML product. And then we'll open the floor to questions from everyone. Maybe Rahul, just to kick it off, would you like to tell everyone a bit more about yourself and sort of your journey to starting till the point of starting sort of AI Dash? What was it like?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Tanay. Thanks everyone. So I'm come with around 20 years of experience, of which around about 12 years were working in different organizations. I think most of my experience was with an enterprise security company called RSA Security. We started as a developer, and then by the time I left, I was leading a global team of a $50 million product there. So have seen that enterprise journey, work with the enterprise customers. Then around 2014, I started my entrepreneurial journey. First couple of startups were B2C startups. That was most prevalent in India at that point of time. So first one was a social commerce startup, which was bootstrapped. And interestingly, started talking to Excel. It was part of the EIR program at Excel. And then we started a consumer fintech startup called Quicklo, which was funded by Excel. Did it for some time. Then I took a sabbatical for some time to figure out my next journey in terms of what I want to do next. AI and blockchain were my topics which I was looking into. Blockchain, I didn't choose to choose, which seemed like a good decision now. AI seemed better in terms of more maturity and where my skills and background seem to make more sense. So started AI Dash. Started thinking about what to do in the AI space back in 2018. Started AI Dash in Jan 2019, so close to 4 years now. So like Tanay mentioned, we use satellite and AI imagery to solve some of the operations, maintenance, and sustainability use cases for organizations where this kind of data makes sense. That is companies with large distributed assets.
Thanks, Rahul. I think would love to understand, what really was the first set of problem that you identified, and then how did you end up identifying the problem? What was the process, and how did you sort of build the first sort of use case, which is the vegetation management use case? So also for everyone's context, would be good to know what AI Dash does, especially the first use case that you started with, and then as we progress, we'll know a bit more about everything else that you're doing.
Sure. So we had a couple of options. So we were looking at this specific problem around, as we were discovering the use cases 2018, late 2018, I started meeting my co-founder Abhishek. We were looking at this issue around wildfire, which was becoming prevalent. And incidentally, many of the cause of wildfires at that point of time was the vegetation management, something as simple as, utilities trying to manage trees which hit the wire. So how do you solve that at scale, right? That seemed like a good use case. An interesting use case, which seemed to have a lot of value. Was a very complex problem to solve. Different people have tried different things. Some people have tried to flying aeroplanes. Some people have tried drones. Some people have, just doing computer vision. there was no good solution. So we started kind of our discovery with that, eventually led to seeing adding satellite imagery to the mix. And satellite imagery in our point of view, or based on our research, was at an inflection point. We felt this is something which can make a lot of sense. So that's how the product building journey started. But in terms of, I think your question was more around how to get the first set of customers. So we had two approaches. One was basically, start something small, start at acquiring some smaller customers, and then get to larger customers as we go along, as the product gets built and you get a lot of early feedback. But the industry which we were dealing with was primarily power utilities. So they are not the ones who would be the first ones to experiment.
Right.
Right. So we had to alter the strategy a bit. So idea there was not to build for a lot of smaller organizations, but pick some larger one, start building the product with them, build some trust, and then kind of get into the branding and marketing and all that. For the kind of industry we were dealing with, yeah, it's very difficult to get entry as a startup. That definitely is a valid question. So what you do in these scenarios, at least that's what worked for us, was to get a channel partner. The first channel partner we used and we still work quite effectively with is BCG, Boston Consulting Group.
Right.
So partnered with them. So they were looking at providing consulting for this large problem around vegetation management. And we became kind of a technology partner for them to start understanding, start working with a customer. Our first customer was Entergy. For first 1 year or so, from like most of 2019 until early 2020, we started working with only one customer rather than going broad-based. We solved the problem with that. We actually built some models. We went to the field along with the utility folks, the field folks. We saw how the model is behaving, did different experiments, and we were able to get them the value within first year. To take it further, right? So we said, okay, this is working. This seems to be going somewhere. So what do we do to get more visibility? So what we did was so there is an event called DistribuTech, which is one of the largest events for power utilities. So back in 2020, I think it was 27th Jan 2020. So we decided to make a formal launch of the product, but we didn't do a launch, just from our side because we're just a startup. So we invited Gary, who was the VP of Distribution Services at Entergy, as a co-host. So Gary and me made the joint product launch. So I covered what the product is about, the tech behind it, etc., etc. And Gary covered the practical aspects, right? So in terms of, this is a traditional industry, people are not used to, let's say, use a lot of deep tech or new tech. So how do you convince them? There are a lot of people who are used to working in a certain manual way. How do you convince them to move? So he was able to answer, and he actually put a pretty good point of view of why this makes sense and why utility should adopt it. We got almost 10 leads just from that session, right? And that we kept building on over the year or so. So I think that strategy worked quite well for us. Eventually, then we got our next customer, National Grid. We got in a similar way. We started working with some with BCG, some without. And interestingly, they had a venture capital fund. They decided to invest in us, for a Series A round. And then once, usually like we see what happens is, once you get yes from one person, then other people join in. So we got BGV as well. So that kind of closed our Series A round. Yeah, so that's the particular journey from the early days, but you're happy to deep dive more into any specific aspects you want me to cover then.
Got it. No, I think would also be sort of interesting to understand, since you didn't have, background in satellite imagery or background in utilities, right? And you came from a fintech and e-commerce background. So what was really the process of identifying, that one problem, that vegetation management, that utility companies are spending millions of dollars figuring out the right trees to cut so that wildfires don't happen and outages don't happen. So even getting to that stage and then building conviction, and then you mentioned that there are people were using drones and people were using aeroplane imagery, which was quite expensive, and building the conviction that satellite imagery is something that can really solve the problem. And starting to build out the product. So what was that process like?
Sure. So I think, so what you're asking is there are two parts. One is how did we build the technology without the background? Another was the domain specific knowledge, right? So I'll cover the domain specific part first. So domain specific, in our case, the channel partner, there are multiple choices for channel partners. In our case, it was a strategy consulting organization, which do come with reasonable, expertise on the domain side. So that kind of helped us a bit. And as founders, we were very actively working with, working with the customer, going in the field with them, really meeting them. I mean, it's not just like, so Abhishek, my co-founder, is based out of US, so he travels quite a lot, and I used to travel quite a lot for the first year, to sit with the customers, understand what their use cases are, what their pain points are. So that helped us quite a lot. Yeah, vegetation management, I understand. Yeah, I don't come from that background, but just trying to understand what they were solving for. For example, the key insights around, it's not just them taking a vegetation management insight and operating on it month on month on day to day. So most of these folks actually don't cut trees themselves. They outsource it to contractors, and many of their contracts are 3 years in advance, right, or a couple of years in advance. So if, let's say, someone gave a contract in 2022, and I pitch them a solution next year or next to next year, it won't work because they've already given a contract, right? They don't need the insight for next 3, right? So some of those nuances you kind of figured out. So now, so that also, as we evolved as a company, helped us figure out, when to reach out the customer, at what point of time it would make sense, when is where the person is in the budget cycle, right? So that they are more. So the domain part, yeah, we kind of covered that way. From a technology perspective, I think, yeah. So that's where, so me, Abhishek, and my third co-founder Nitin, who comes with a very deep AI background, kind of helped. So we have built large enterprise products earlier. Like I said, so I have a lot of experience in working large enterprise security products, which were used by Fortune 50. So we have that deep expertise. AI part, yeah, Nitin brought that expertise around that. Yeah, satellite imagery was new, but yeah, for us it was a new data set. We had to learn fast. So we built a team who can adapt fast, learn fast.
And you mentioned that you onboarded BCG, right? And I'm assuming that that's not an easy task to do. One of the biggest sort of consulting firms, right? Working with a startup which is not even at a stage where you guys have a product, right? And they helped you sort of get the first customer and helped you sort of build the product with the expertise they had. So what was that process like? How did you convince them that you are the right set of people to partner with, and build the first product out?
So I won't say there was a specific process in getting started. I think Abhishek had worked with one of the groups there in his previous startup, and that was a starting point. But that's always just a starting point, right? But the idea there was, from there on, we work closely with them to make sure they are also deriving as much as value. It's like a win-win proposition. So when they are in the strategy constantly, they have the necessary tech chops which we can help with, and they help us with the strategy. So it had to be a win-win, cooperative kind of relationship. Yeah. So you might usually within your network, or from here or there, you can reach somewhere. But the partnerships only work, when it is a win-win for both the parties. So you have to make sure, they are deriving as much value from it as we are.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Right. So I think, and the companies that you're sort of selling to are like extremely traditional companies, like utility, transmission and distribution companies, and a lot of them are also publicly owned, and cooperative companies that you're selling to, right? And government owned entities as well. Right. And they would have never really seen such a strong technology products that's using AI ML. So all of this would have been very new to them in a lot of cases when you went to them with the product, right? After you started doing sales outside of the channel partners, right? So how did you sort of convince them that this is the right thing to do? And just help us also understand what does your sales process look like? You briefly mentioned that these events worked out really well for you, and you got 10 leads from the first event that you did. Just help us understand what's the entire sort of GTM like for you, and what really helped convince them that this is the right technology to use for their vegetation management.
Sure. So the way we work with this scenario, or this specific user persona, which does not necessarily understand technology, but they know what they are doing, right? And the use case which they are looking is very clear to them. So we solved all the technology complexity at our end, but we tried to keep the product which they are using, the vegetation management system which we created first, as simple to use as possible, right? So we had the user personas around the vegetation managers who would take the budget, approve it, do different kind of analysis. So all that thing, we tried to make it as simple as possible, and we kept building a product with all these different veg managers on, let's say, Interjeep as a first customer, National Grid as a second customer. We tried to make sure we understand the use cases really, really well, so that even though they may or may not trust the technology, but at least they understand what the value they are driving out of it. Other thing what we did was we didn't,
So
look
maybe
at.
Rahul, can you
Yeah.
also help us understand how do they see value in the product? What is it that you exactly solve for, and how do they see value? Just for everyone's context.
Sure. So basically, in this specific use case, what the value they are driving is, so they right now they are spending, anywhere from tens of millions to even more than $100 million of budget every year just for vegetation management. But the way they do this is they do this, okay, I cut the trees for so and so areas or trim the tree for so and so areas this year. Then, since that is already cut and the trees do not grow overnight, so next time I should do it in a 5-year trim cycle, 7-year trim cycle, 4-year trim cycle, right? Based on whatever initial theory they have. They're not going and inspecting this or getting this data on a very regular basis. So when we get the satellite imagery at scale and we give them this analysis, we can, really help them save a lot of budget. Okay, yeah, you have a 5-year cycle, but don't go in this area this year because this is good. We already inspected from satellite, right? So we were able to get them, an budget reduction by 10 to 20% of their, tens of millions of dollars of a lot of or more budget. At the same time, not reducing the reliability, which is a really critical metrics for them. I mean, there's obviously a lot of pressure around them to reduce budget with all, I mean, as usually happens, but the reliability they cannot reduce. It's a utility at the end of the day, right? So
Right.
so that's the ROI we are talking about. And in terms of, the other part you're talking about, the GTM part, so we didn't ask people to, use the product and use it as is. So what we do for all of these cases is we take them through a pilot. We say, pick any area, any combination of, let's say, distribution lines or transmission lines or whatever you want to work with. Most people would choose from anywhere from 50 miles to 100 miles to even 1,000 miles. So we'll run the analysis for you. We'll set up the product for you. Then you go and see the value yourself, right? We'll go with you in the field. We'll understand, what's working, what's not working. That also helps us fine tune our models, because whatever feedback there are models, let's say, are not accurate, we can take the feedback back to our models and, make sure they are more accurate as we go to more and more territories. So the pilots and how we run that, and pilots are more like a CAC for us, right? So we're not looking at making margin there. So they are paid pilots. Paid pilots are important because if they're not paid, then that means that the company is not really interested, right? So you want to make
So
sure that
you've never done free pilots?
we have never done free pilots. All
Okay.
pilots have been paid because that shows the urgency at the customer side.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. Yeah. So you were talking about the entire sales cycle. So if you would like to talk a bit more about that and also share how I think the last time we were talking, Abhishek was mentioning that you're hinging a lot on these events, and especially for a vertical SaaS company, why is that important? And just sort of help us understand what really happens from end to end, and at each of the steps, what has really maybe worked out well for you.
Sure. So I think in terms of marketing, so even though we didn't raise any funding, but we set up a large 20 by 10 booth in Distributech, the event which I was talking about. So it's for these utilities. Yeah, I mean, so they are large, right? And they are working with all the Accentures and BCGs and McKinseys of the world. So it's not easy for them to trust someone. So it was important for us to set up a booth and make sure we made our presence felt. So Distributech is one of, like I said, one of the largest utility events. And from there on, we have also cherry picked on, which are the events where the user personas would hang around, which are the ones where they're taking insights around what is the next tool to use, which can help them. So we kind of covered all these different conferences. So over a period of time, as we got deep into marketing, we made sure our brand is visible in all those places. So making sure we have the right sponsorship, making sure we are at the right places. We also started our own podcast around vegetation management. We started another one recently called Satellite Superheroes to make sure whatever is happening satellite, we simplify it for them. And how to use satellite, they kind of hear from us first, right? So our idea was to become number one brand there in utility vegetation management. We did as a
Got
company.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. And as you were working, with BCG, with the first sort of customer, right? Was there anything that you did actively to ensure that it doesn't become, a customized solution only for this one customer, right? Which is what usually ends up happening for a lot of companies as they are working with one large design partner. Uh, I mean, they build out the solution and then they realize that the solution is probably not applicable for some of the other customers, right? So was there anything that you did actively to ensure that that's not happening and that what you're building towards is the requirement for the entire industry and not just for that one customer?
Yeah, so basically, yeah, we had to be so you are absolutely right. So whichever customer you go to would have their own set of use cases which they would want to get into. So from our
Right.
perspective, we try to be really, really conscious about that, which are the critical use cases, which are the ancillary use cases. And from our perspective, it's not like, let's say I Intergy or a National Grid ask me something, I'll say no to it. What I'll do, tell them is, okay, boss, this is my SaaS product, you know, but whatever I'm doing additional is, let's say, a professional services wrapper on top of it. So trying to
Yeah.
distinguish from the start, this is my core product. This is something add on. An enterprise size, it's not a SaaS kind of product. It's not uncommon to do professional services. Coming from an
Yeah.
enterprise security product background, it's important because when you're doing professional services, you actually are dealing with the users more and more to try and understand what their use cases are, and sometimes also helps you figure out the feature roadmap of your product, right? You may not want to do it now because you don't have, let's say, deep IP or enough thought around it because you don't have, let's say, 5 other customers who want that. But that gives you ideas for the future roadmap as well, right? At times. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, as you become a different brand, as you become a bigger brand, so some of these can be outsourced to a third party vendor as well.
Got it. Got it. Understood. And I think would love to spend some time trying to understand, post vegetation management. You
Mhm.
saw, you onboarded a few customers. Was there a point where you realized, okay, that for this use case I've hit PMF, and this use case is now going to scale? So was that any moment, or were there any signs that made you realize that, okay, now we know that this is going to become large, at least for that one use case?
So we did couple of use cases after vegetation management. Some of
Right.
them were asked by the customers themselves. For example, like Entergy, right? So Entergy is situated in like Louisiana, Texas, that area, which gets a lot of storms. So a couple of large storms over last 1 to 2 years, Ida and a couple of others were all hit. Entergy was the recipient of that. So they started asking about, we are getting these disasters. Can we predict something in advance and do something about it so that we are better prepared and we can manage the storm better and the post-storm activities better? So that kind of led to genesis of our disaster DDMS, a disruption and disaster management product. So that kind of started becoming evident from the customers. So whichever customers are more affected by storms, they ask that. On the California side, you may, let's say, may not have as many storms, but this wildfire kind of thing is more prevalent. So started
Yeah.
asking around, if there's a wildfire, how can better manage that? Can we again do
Yeah.
something in advance, like the PG&Es of the world, the Vistas and all that? So we started getting those kind of requests for them. So some of those things, yeah, kind of, started as customer requests and became into a product. We are working on that. Sustainability again, actually was that idea came from one of our investors who is a utility background, National Grid. So they felt this is a use case which is really becoming prevalent on the Europe, the UK market. We started with that. We did a pilot with them themselves, and now that's actually becoming quite well. Our hypothesis of picking these use cases is like what we do in traditionally in the VC side, picking medicine rather than the vitamin. So that criteria we have always applied.
Got it. Got it. Can you also maybe double down on each of these use cases? I think these two are the biggest second and third use cases. One is the disaster management, and the other is sustainability management, right? So we'd love to understand what does the disaster management product do, and how are you leveraging satellite imagery and technology to sort of help them predict disasters and help them manage disasters.
Sure. So I think there were two things here. One is like what the customers were asking, and then we also look at to go back and look at what IP we have built, which is relevant for both the use cases. The IP we have built for vegetation management, which is around understanding the trees, that species, the grass, and all that kind of thing. So that IP we had built by using satellite images. So we had computer vision models which can predict them at scale. And incidentally, both the use cases are really important for disaster management and sustainability. So for disaster management, what happens is if there are trees which are closer to the wire, if a storm comes, they can fall on the wire and cause more damage. So, so, so most of the folks, most of the companies which are doing disaster prediction can tell you in this area, you would have, a very high intensity storm, but they can't go to the level of details around. I mean, these are the power lines and there are trees which might fall. That means you will have more damage on these power lines, but we can do that because we can do both, right? So
Right.
that became an obvious choice from an IP perspective. So what this product does is it divides the pre-storm, during storm, post-storm into different activities. Pre-storm, given our analysis around past storms, let's say historical data around that is usually available in public domain. Let's say last 50 years, what were the storms like? What was the intensity? Based on that, which is the area which is more susceptible for storm? And if this is susceptible, whatever assets you have, the transformers, the wires, or all that, which are the ones which maybe need more hardening? Something, can you do something before the storm comes to minimize the damage, right? Or maybe change the construction or put some extra protection, etc., etc. So and we can do this prediction much earlier than the traditional, data available from like NOAA and others, because we rely on some of the commercial satellite vendors here. So most people can do 24 hours prediction. We can do 48 hours or better, which gives them a lot of, give them a lot of time to prepare during the storm.
Yeah.
Because what happens during storm is it's very difficult to get the crew who can, manage the post-disaster work. So if you know in advance, you can try and procure the crew much earlier. You can station them in the appropriate places. So the product kind of helps them, make out that strategy, how to, manage the storm during the storm kind of thing. And post-storm, again, you can do a pre and post kind of comparison and figure out how to manage your, restoration plans. So that's what it does at a high level. Sustainability is more around, so there's basically, so there are two areas there. One is biodiversity, one is carbon. So what we do is a bit different than many people, what they do on the sustainability side. So many of the sustainability products today are around, carbon credits and other kind of credits. So let's say I want to be recognized as a sustainable entity, right? So if I don't, either I have enough carbon credits or, I can buy it from somewhere else. So what we do on our product is a bit different. We say, let's say a National Grid or any of the other organizations who have large areas of land, can I use them, the greenery within them, to actually, figure out my sustainability quotient a bit better? So that's where we help them with. Same with carbon, right? So some of the things are carbon absorbing. So there are concepts around carbon sequestration. So how do you better use them within what you have already available rather than relying on a different source? So sustainability product is more around that. It gives you a level set or baseline of where you are today and where you want to go from here.
Got it. And for the sustainability use case, was there a very strong why now that you saw, other than one of your investors asking you for the product? I think there's some tailwinds in Europe that because of which you felt the use case is important.
Yeah, the investor asking was just a coincidence, and we started as a small pilot. But yeah, what we also saw was there was the biodiversity is quickly rising up in general from a ESG, like the ESG space. Biodiversity specifically has been really becoming, changing from vitamin to a mandatory act in UK. So it was a combination of both. Yeah, I mean, so it's just that the investor made us aware of the use case, and we realized we had the ability to work on it. But yeah, it was a medicine by the time we started.
Got it. And obviously you would have realized that there are of the IP that you build, there are multiple things that can be done, right? From the images that you're taking and the analysis that you're doing, right? Were there, other set of use cases that you would have identified and then you prioritize these two? So what I'm trying to understand is, how did you prioritize some of these use cases, right? Because there's a lot of R&D spend that goes into building these use cases and building the complex workflows that you've built, right? So what really was the process of saying that, okay, this is a use case that we are going to prioritize versus this is some other use case that we don't see working out right now and we want to deprioritize?
So I think one of that is ability to sell or upsell. For example, disaster management, like I mentioned. So we are not selling it as a separate product as of today. So whoever we are selling IVMS to, we kind of upsell them to DDMS. So we know we already have an entry in that customer base. So can we give them more value, right? It's a separate product, and which that's how it works, because the user personas are different. For vegetation manager is different guy, and disaster manager, whoever manages the disaster, the data process is a different guy. So kind of becomes two different products for the company. So that kind of helped us, figure out, okay, this use case makes sense because more of an upsell. We already know the customer, we have a relationship. Can we do more for them, right?
Yeah.
Sustainability kind of use case. So yeah, we started with then. We realized there's a market. We already have the IP, and the market is suddenly expanding. And we analyze whatever different players are doing on sustainability. This looked like a differentiated product to us, and we felt it would be good to take an early lead.
Got it. Understood. And for a core ML product like yours, right, the accuracy and the effectiveness of the product increases with time, right? And as you mentioned, that the feedback that customers gave initially also helped you sort of fine tune, right? But in a space like yours, right, every wrong prediction, you saying that this tree is not at risk, but it was actually at risk, is a huge cost, and in the grid reliability, and the utilities might end up paying penalties, right? So how, one question, how are you able to sort of overcome that initial sort of apprehension from the customers, and sort of still deliver value at the initial stages when the product was in the initial stages of development, right? Because why I'm asking this question is a lot of the companies in the cohort right now are very early, right? And their product is being built, right? And they're probably not where they will be 3, 4, 5 years later in the journey, right, in terms of the product quality, because these are core AI ML products, right? So even at the initial stages when the product is not 100% there, how do you still onboard customers and show them real value? And were there times when you faced challenges with this and were unable to do so?
Right. So I think I would say probably a combination of two things here. One is the use cases we specifically picked, right? Like, for example, the vegetation management to start with. So this is, and that's what happens with typically in AI, right? And many of the specific use cases, you're not looking at, let's say, 100% accuracy, right? And we're also looking at, we are giving value to a set of customers who don't have anything today, right? So they are actually operating in blind. All they can say is, cut trees in this area every 5 years. That's all I know. I can't, go and inspect everything. So we figured out if we give them an incremental value which is useful, even it may not, let's say, be 100% accurate. We, let's say, started with around, I don't know, for our initial few wheel validations, we were getting around about 70-75% accuracy, which was still better for them, to say, okay, I'm getting 70% data, which is right. 30% are, let's say, maybe false positives. I might still have to go and check them, but it's still more useful. But as we started building that trust, because they were operating in blind in this use case, right? And we started getting that feedback, the model started becoming better. Additionally, from our side, given these scenarios, we also looked at a lot of alternate data sources. For example, can I look at something in, because it's satellite imagery, right? So let's say, can I look at something in Google, what is available? Can I figure out some other data sources? Can I add a lot of QA validations kind of thing? So for each customers, because the pilots were not large, right? And much of the focus was around delivering value and how we do that in the product, both from the ROI perspective and otherwise. So we did a lot of these checks and balances. So you are right. I mean, I cannot give a wrong value to a customer that won't really make it a repeat or a convert the customer. So you had to put a lot of effort there, but at the same time, it was also a combination of the use case you pick in the beginning and setting the right expectation in the beginning. We never claim it will be 100% accurate.
Got it. And I think as we let's say look at your future roadmap, right? You're also betting on technological advancements, right? Satellite imagery getting better, the resolution of imagery getting better, right? And you are sort of thinking of future products or use cases basis that technological advancements happen, and some of which aren't in your control per se, right? Because I mean, there's someone else who's sort of giving you the imagery, right? So in that cases, in such cases, how do you sort of build that conviction of that really happening, and sort of enable that and provide that conviction to your customers, to your investors?
Right. So I can paint a rosy picture for them. Yeah, definitely. In terms, for example, like we always talk about, today the best in class is 30 centimeter imagery, but 10 centimeter imagery, there is a company called Albedo, which is coming in. They recently called a series of funding of 50 million, etc., etc. But at the same time, I need to give them some value today, right? Yeah. Because that's the only thing I can tell them. Yeah, I can sell them. Yeah, this technology is improving and all that. Because the customer's conviction would be based on what they see today, right? The future, all I'm saying is, it would even get better. Yeah, I might have a 70% accuracy because that's the best I can see. 30 centimeter resolution means it's like a plus minus 30 centimeter or a 60 centimeter error margin, right? But if I get 10 centimeter, that maybe the error margin reduces much, quite a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to drive the value today. Yeah, I mean, I can tell them all the good picture. I can show them, all I can show them is the past and where I have reached today. But the future, I can tell them a good story, but I have to, again, they're the value today, basically.
What really has worked well for you in terms of fundraising, right? And you've raised a lot of money, touch wood, and I'm sure you'll continue to. So what's worked well for you? What were some of the challenges that you faced through this journey? I think initially at the early stages when the product was not there, right? And how were you able to overcome some of those challenges? And what would be some best practices you would like to share with everyone, as and most of the companies would be pre-seed seed stage, so as they look to raise their series A, series B, what would sort of be your advice?
Sure. So our case, we ran the company for almost 2 years before we did our first venture fundraise. We were, managing on our own. We did a bit of, like I said, we were doing both SaaS and the professional services. We were kind of doing on our own, so that kind of fund ourselves. And also the reason was, we were also talking to a couple of VCs, but we realized that, unless the story is crisp, unless we prove what we are doing, it's difficult to get the funding. So that only happened, frankly speaking, we directly did a series A. We didn't do a seed or pre-series A. That happened when we converted Entergy. And then post that, I think it's also about then figuring out how the construct of your product is, right? So initially we were thinking of making it like a enterprise software, or should it be SaaS? Should it be something else? And if it is SaaS, then what are the metric which matters? In SaaS, it's typically ARR. So we kind of, because what also happens with utilities is, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes these become like custom projects. That's where if you look at many of the satellite imagery companies, and they were, I don't know if you know, there was a company called Descartes Labs, which got shut down recently for the same reason. They started as a satellite analytics imagery provider solutions, but they were never able to find a product which, so they raised, I think, more than $100 million, but they had to shut down because they tried to move from there to a SaaS company, but were not able to. So we were able to, I think not raising funding for some time gave us some time to, experiment and get our construct in place. How, if we are making it a SaaS product, it should look like. So we were able to get the right construct. We were able to figure out, okay, these are right metrics for ARR. I mean, and typically, I think the industry metrics are there. How much of ARR should be at series A, B, C kind of level. Then it was all about the journey of making sure, we get there, we get the right metrics. And the kind of industry we are dealing with. So we are one of the fastest companies, to convert that many utility customers. So we most of our luckily have been inbound. We haven't reached to, went to a formal pitching session yet.
Got it. No, I think I would love for everyone else to sort of shoot any questions. I think Boomitra is one company that's building in a space slightly similar to yours. They're sort of leveraging satellite imagery to enable farmers to sort of sell carbon credits and increase their income. So that's an interesting problem they're solving. Maybe one more question, Rahul. We also know that your pipeline conversion is exceptional, right? I think there's hardly any drop-offs that happen once there's a pilot that starts, right? So would love to understand what is it that you think you've done well when it comes to bringing customers for a pilot and then sort of converting them. And we've never seen numbers like yours.
Yeah. So basically, I think for our case, the focus has been on delivering quality right from the beginning. So earlier it was a set of founders and the leadership team which was doing that. But as we went along, after we did a couple of rounds, as we were, expanding the organization, we were very particular about creating this organization called Customer Success, which is responsible for, making sure they get involved once the sales get win a pilot. And after getting the pilot, how do we make sure the pilot actually proves the value to the customer? So we have been careful in building that organization right from the scratch, so that, after a sale is done, the product pilot or even the SaaS products, which we have now, many of them are converted to SaaS, they're not left in between, right? So there is someone who's always owning the experience and also looking at opportunities as we go forward for upsell, cross-sell, etc., etc.
Actually, you shared one thing that in the starting, you were thinking about going to the small customers, like smaller in size, where the deal conversion is quick. But later on, you realize that, okay, you have to go to the biggies from day one. So, and I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, like the whole phase of, let's say, starting a conversation to converting a customer would have been at least 5-6 months or something of that order. So how did that process look like? Like, how did you decide that, okay, it's still relevant to go to the big ones directly? because they are the right fit for us, and because it can get gloomy, right? Like for 5-6 months if we don't have a customer. So how did you think about the whole process at that time?
Sure. So who's this, by the way? Shalab, right?
Yeah, Shalab.
Hey, hi, Shalab. So yeah, so I think yeah, I agree with you. Not getting anything for some time, and just working on it can definitely get gloomy. It's not like you are getting some quick wins, or okay, I converted so and so customers every week, every month, etc., etc. But interestingly, so me, Abhishek, we come with a enterprise software background where we have done this journey quite a few times earlier. So yeah, it gets gloomy, but yeah, we have done that in the past, so it kind of helped. We have done this journey multiple times earlier with converting larger customers earlier. So that's the way it works. So the only thing is you figure out as you are have in that process how much you want to, let's say, raise, because, or at what point you want to raise, because once you obviously make a venture investment, you get on a treadmill, you need to keep running faster. So you need to choose the timing for that as well. So we chose not to raise fund at that point of time when we were still in a discovery phase. But when we knew that if we take the money, we can scale. We are scale ready. So till we were able to figure out our product market fit, we chose to manage with very less investment, and we kept a very small team at that point of time.
Just to follow up, like so at some time, like why did you drop the idea that okay, going with a small customer is still not a good deal for me to get started with, because the big ones will also feel comfortable joining the bandwagon also.
No, I agree. I agree, and that's totally valid point. I think in our case, the kind of product we are building with and the user persona we were dealing with is a bit different. Let's say if I was not building this product, right? Let's say I was building a more of a product where the end user is let's say a developer rather than a vegetation manager. I might have chosen a different strategy of targeting the smaller customers first. It depends upon the product and the user persona. The kind of product, let's say if I'm building a smaller SaaS product like a Asana or something which I can get some quick customers, they can learn on their own. I don't need a customer success kind of organization which I'm talking about. If it's a easy product, let's say Asana kind of product, it's a project management tool. I just go to the website, I download it and start using it within half an hour, 1 hour. This is not that kind of a product, and not the user personas I'm talking about are not going to Google and trying out different things, right? So they need support, they need some guidance. So I didn't have an option in this specific product, but in some other products, yeah, I mean, I don't know what products you guys are working on. It may make more sense.
Yeah, thanks Rahul for the perspective.
Okay, we'll wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Rahul, for taking out the time. Really appreciate you doing this for us and everyone. And was lovely talking to you once again. Thank you.
My pleasure. Hope it was helpful for everyone. Okay.
Super helpful. Thank you everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.